Hi, this is Megan Fee with GRC and Me. On today's episode, we speak with Dustin Owens. Dustin is LogicGate's GRC principal architect, and he has decades of experience within IT risk, security, and controls, with experience of cyber strategy, risk management, compliance, and privacy across multiple verticals. His previous companies include working at Hewlett-Packard, DXC, and Optiv. Today, we talk about the concept of risk quantification, the value for organizations, and the future of GRC. And now, here's my conversation with Dustin. Dustin Owens, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Megan, how are you?
I'm really great, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. So I always love to start off, if you could share with the listeners just a little bit about your background in the GRC space.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to. So I've had roughly 25 plus years of experience in cybersecurity as a whole, and over 20 of that has actually been almost exclusively focused in the GRC space. So I actually cut my teeth back in, it's been 2003. I got introduced to risk quantification for the first time, actually, and as part of the NSA's InfoSec assessment methodology. They had a process that was actually based off of the Octave framework, which is basically the same framework that the FAIR methodology uses today. So a lot of the terminology and things from FAIR actually applied to that, and I got to experience that 18 years ago.
That's fantastic. Now, you mentioned something really interesting. You said risk quantification. So for the listeners who are less familiar with that concept, can you break down what is risk quantification?
Yeah, absolutely. So risk quantification is really about expressing risk findings in the form of monetary impact. So instead of using the traditional red, yellow, green to indicate status of what, how important risk findings might be to an organization, or even high, medium, and low, those things lacked a lot of context. And oftentimes, even within an organization, they had difficulty making sure that they were consistently using the same definitions of high, medium, or low, or what red, yellow, and green constituted. So it was really confusing. So quantification is actually about applying dollars and cents or other forms of currency in other countries to risk findings so that everybody can be consistent about what those findings are telling them and what it means from a business impact perspective.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. So, seeking greater understanding of the business impact. So, when we think about risk quantification, what do you think that will be able to allow or afford organizations to do, or whether it's within their own risk program or to a broader business impact?
Yeah, so one of the first things is one of the points that I actually just brought up in that definition of risk quantification, and it's about providing consistency, right? Being able to show risk findings on a consistent basis, and something that every part of the organization can provide in that same consistent manner. You can understand what those results are telling you in a very straightforward manner, right? This amount of dollar impact is something very easy for business leaders to understand. So I think that's the first part of the importance of quantification to a risk program. But it can allow them, as organizations mature and how they're adapting those quantifiable risk practices, not only for assessing risk, but then, how they respond to risk. It can actually help them better prioritize what activities they need to pay attention to. And quite simply, what that means is they can pay attention to what are the highest dollar impacts that we need to worry about, and how much investment do we need to put into solving those particular risks, because everything's been put into financial terms. It's in dollars and cents, so they can easily see and more consistently see that, am I underspending in this category, or am I overspending in trying to control this particular risk? It makes it very easy to compare risk mitigation activities and whether
Mm-hmm.
or not they do risk acceptance or transfer risk based on the amount of impact that risk has to the business, and see if it makes sense to go one direction versus another.
So I'm hearing you mention that aspect of driving a consistent way to speak or measure risk. And we've talked about this before on the podcast about, creating a common language of risk. And it sounds like with risk quantification, the common language is the financial, impact, right, to the organization and the opportunity for folks to either take strategic risks or understand the financial impacts of the risks. So, what role do you see risk quantification playing in the future of the broader governance, risk, and compliance umbrella?
Well, I think for one thing, Megan, it definitely tees up to make it easier to manage risk on a single platform, regardless or despite what type of risk you're trying to manage. If everybody's
Hmm.
working from that consistent basis,
Yeah.
and working in dollars and cents for how they're assessing their different categories of risk, whether it's IT risk, legal risk, HR risk, you name it, if they're all
Yeah.
using consistent formulas to calculate risk and show what the risk findings are saying, it makes it so much easier to combine into sort of an integrated risk view, right? And you can manage risk across multiple categories much easier than if you're using different definitions of risk findings, high, medium, or low, or red, yellow, green, and those things don't necessarily translate. It makes it a lot
Hmm.
more difficult to integrate the different risk units across the business if you're not using something like dollars and cents in financial terms. So I think that's part one for what's going to be in the future is we're going to see the greater ability for organizations to do, call it integrated risk management if you want, or just more
Yeah.
cohesive and holistic risk management,
Okay.
depending on your druthers. But it basically makes it easier for that. I think also what we'll see is a lot more risk-based decision making can then start to happen. So
Right.
organizations are going to find it easier to understand what that information is telling them. It's going to make
Yeah.
immediate sense. This is the level of risk that this represents. And they can start applying that to various aspects of their business that they may not have been doing before. So, as an example, they may take something like vulnerability management that they're currently operating with and across the organization. Most organizations are not taking a risk-based approach to
Hmm.
topics like vulnerability management. Well,
Hmm.
quantifying risk and providing financial terminology and financial results makes it much more appealing to start taking a risk-based approach to vulnerability management, to start helping you classify which vulnerabilities in which patches do we apply in which order? How do we
Right.
prioritize patching priorities? How do we understand how much money to spend on vulnerability scanning versus penetration testing versus code review and things of that nature? Well, they can start equating their investment in that area to financial risk that they're trying to evaluate by using those quantified results. And by
Hmm.
using that risk based approach, it makes it much easier to measure the effectiveness of something like vulnerability management.
Well, I think you just really hit on that. Like, how do you appropriately measure the effectiveness of this, and how do you cut through? I call it the noise. There's a lot of data points to analyze when we're thinking about risk and we're thinking about governance, risk, and compliance. There's a lot of inputs that folks are looking at day in and day out, and thinking about how to share that with senior leadership, share that with their board, and provide this culture of risk awareness. And it sounds like risk quantification is going to help foster those conversations, help foster where to make and take strategic risks and where to spend the time. Ultimately, it sounds like, it's all of those great benefits gained, but also I can see organizations moving faster, being more competitive, being able to, iterate quicker as an organization because they have these insights. Would you agree? Are you thinking that that's really, what organizations would be able to do? Or, maybe are there any other areas that you think the future could look like when folks really apply this kind of risk quantification or a risk methodology to their programs?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think greater agility, the ability to move faster, be more adaptable. Those are all clear benefits that I think will come out of being able to quantify risk and to be able to do that on a consistent basis across the
Yeah.
organization. So those are
Yeah.
definitely things that are going to come as a result, I would foresee. I think
Okay.
that what it's also going to allow organizations to do is it allows them to make decisions quicker, right? Because they don't have to
Ah,
interpret the results. The results are the results, and they're in dollars and cents, and they're clearly laid out. They don't have
right.
to stop and try and interpret, and does this make sense? Does it not make sense? They can just move, right? And that makes
Yeah.
them so much more quick in getting their business to where they want to get it because they were able to make those decisions that much quicker.
I think that's fantastic. So thank you. Thank you for walking us through, your background and what is risk quantification and really what the future could look like, whether it's within organizations that are applying, this kind of property to their risk methodology, but also just what the future could be for decision making when applied something like a risk quantification. So thank you for that. Now, we always like to wrap our conversations with just a fun question for you. So we know you've spent a lot of your career in risk and compliance from an advisory and services side of the business, and now you're here at Logigate, so you're at the technology side. And I know you have a passion for technology yourself. And I think a little birdie told me that you took a class yourself. You said, "Hey, I want to learn what it's like to be an engineer, to be a technologist." So tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about what as a student kind of this space and both a blend of technology and GRC. Tell us a little bit about that. What class did you take back in the day, and why do you have such a passion for GRC technology?
Yeah, that's a really fun question, Megan. So I actually got my undergraduate degree in computer information systems. And at the time, the program that I went to was very centered around supplying graduates to the insurance industry. Insurance industry at the time was very mainframe centric. And so a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the programming was done in COBOL. And that's
Okay.
a programming language that probably a lot of people today aren't very familiar with, but I was completely immersed in COBOL. And after going through advanced COBOL classes, I can tell you my roommate and I spent 80 hours in the lab just in 1 week doing our final project. 80 hours of just straight programming, lights off, slide a pizza under the door, and just banging away on the keyboard. I knew at that time, after that week, we did great. We got a great grade in the class and all that. But I was like, I don't know if I can do programming day in and day out like this for the rest of my life. And that's when I started actually getting into more of IT networking and IT security and cybersecurity and kind of started transitioning into that space. But I've always taken away from those programming courses, especially in COBOL, they're very logically focused. So, what that gave me the ability to do when it came to evaluating things like GRC platforms, it helps you understand on the back end how to piece together the logic of how that particular platform is operating and allows you to realize much quicker, is something really good or is it just kind of maybe a nice pretty UI but there's not a lot behind it. You could quickly understand those things and see the logic that's kind of taken place to make things happen on the screen and allow you to see what's a really good platform? And I'll tell you, one of the things that drew me to LogicGate was you can immediately see everything that's going in there. It's so adaptable and flexible as a program. It's really not hard not to love that and fall in love with the Risk Cloud and everything that it's capable of doing. And I got to tell you, I think we've just scratched the surface with this.
Well, I know for some, Cobalt might be a fun blast from the past. They might be familiar with it, but I think you're right. It gives you this appreciation for technology in general, as well as GRC technology, and grateful probably that with the Risk Cloud, you don't have to do any of that coding, whether it's Cobalt or any other language, you don't have to do it. So Dustin,
Right.
thank you so much for sharing your experience and some insights with us today. So for more information on LogicGate and on the Risk Cloud, visit logicgate.com. And until next time, this is Megan Fee with GRC and Me.